Do you think it is already time to talk about what no one wants to admit? That being normal is actually the biggest illusion of our life. Will Byers, that boy who seemed like just a regular kid from Hawkins, shows us that surviving is not enough. And what if I told you that his real battle, and maybe ours too, is not against monsters from another world, but against what we carry inside us? This is what no one tells you. Trauma does not end when the threat is gone, and if there were a way to use that pain in your favor, turning fear and guilt into silent strength, would you be willing to learn how? If you are a fan of cinema psychology and want to understand the mind behind your favorite character, go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss any video. But first, comment below which character you want me to analyze here on the channel. Now, let us go to the video. Will Byers is that kind of character who carries a quiet sweetness, you know. The boy who always seems to be in another world, and ironically, he literally was, before the disappearance. Will was just a regular boy from Hawkins, shy creative, who spent hours playing Dungeons & Dragons with his friends. But even in his innocence, there was already a shadow of extra sensitivity, as if he saw nuances that others simply ignored. He was the kind of kid who feels the mood of the room shift even before anyone says anything. The small town with its dark streets and the sound of bikes cutting through the wind seemed like the perfect setting for an ordinary childhood, except in Will's case that calmness was only the prologue to something much bigger. Because when he disappears, the whole world collapses, not only his but his friends, his mother, and even the viewer who finds themselves thinking, what if it were me? That disappearance was not only physical, it was almost as if his purity had been ripped away by force. And when he returns, he comes back, but not completely. There is something in his eyes that reveals the trauma even when the script does not say a word. It is that feeling that the body is here but the soul is stuck somewhere else. Many people have lived something similar, not being kidnapped by a parallel dimension, of course, but feeling like they came back from a difficult phase as someone the world no longer recognizes, and honestly who has never felt kind of out of themselves. The most curious thing is that Will has always been the heart of the group. Mike is the voice, Eleven is the power, Dustin is the mind, but Will is the emotional link. He is the one who reminds everyone of what truly matters, friendship, loyalty, and that kind of love that does not need to be spoken out loud to exist. Except as time passes, he starts to feel out of place, even within his own group, as if that bond that once kept him alive now became the constant reminder that he is the only one who did not move on. And this is much deeper than it seems, because at some level, everyone has gone through that being forgotten while the world keeps spinning. Sometimes you are the center of the story for a moment and then boom, the focus shifts. People grow, change, and you stay there trying to understand when you stopped being part of it. And poor Will feels this twice, both in the real world and in the metaphysical one. He returned, but no one expected him to be the same. This feeling follows him like a shadow. You notice it in his gestures, in the distant look, in the way he speaks. Little, but feels a lot. He is the kind of character who communicates more through silence than words, and that is where the audience connects with him. Because everyone has had that moment when the world was too loud and all you wanted was to hide quietly, hoping someone would notice your silence. And the most poetic thing is that Will, even while fragile, continues being the emotional thermometer of the series. When he suffers, we feel it. When he isolates himself, it is as if the whole town gets colder. It is almost as if the script uses his emotional state to reflect the very energy of the world of Stranger Things. And maybe that is why he is so iconic. Will is the living symbol of everything that is invisible but still weighs a ton. But of course, all that apparent calmness has a price, because inside him there is much more than the trauma of a disappearance. There is guilt, there is fear, there is something he still cannot name, something that eats at him slowly. And it is exactly at this point that things start to get darker. The trauma of the disappearance and the feeling of not belonging. Will Byers' disappearance was not just a traumatic event, it was a symbolic death. For several days he was trapped in a place that defies logic and sanity, a distorted reflection of our world. And the most painful part is that when he comes back, his body is whole, but his mind stayed behind. As if every breath still carried the bitter taste of fear. And this is what many people do not understand about trauma. It does not end when the danger ends. Will survived, but with the feeling that something in him was torn away. That purity, that curious gaze toward the world was replaced by an uncomfortable stillness. He begins to become the ghost among the living, someone who walks beside his friends, but always with one foot in another dimension, the dimension of memory. It is the classic symptom of someone who went through something too big to explain. And of course, anyone who has felt like they carry something no one else understands knows exactly how this feels. But the worst part is not remembering what happened. The worst part is that the world insists on continuing as if nothing ever happened. People go back to work, friends return to their laughter, and Will stays there trying to pretend everything is fine while his heart still beats to the rhythm of panic. It is the kind of silence that hurts, the kind of pain that does not scream but burns under the skin. And inside, he starts to believe he may never be the same again. And then comes the second wound, the feeling of not belonging. The group that once was his refuge now seems distant. Mike has 11, Dustin gets lost in his inventions, Lucas falls in love and will watch us from afar, trying to understand at what point he stopped fitting into that world. It is like returning to a house that no longer has the same smell. You know the place, but something changed, and no one seems to notice except you. This feeling is more common than it looks. How many times have we tried to relive moments that time already took away? Childhood friendships, plans, everything changes even when we do not want it to, and Will feels that deeply in both literal and emotional ways. He tries to laugh at the same jokes, join the same adventures, but feels out of sync. It is like dancing to a song only he can still hear. And the saddest part is that he tries to fit in. He does everything not to be a burden to the group, not to worry his mother, not to be the fragile boy again. But the more he hides, the more distant he becomes. It is one of life's classic ironies. The more we try to prove we are fine, the more the world notices something is wrong. And Will, with his introspective ways, becomes the perfect reflection of silent trauma, the kind that does not shout, only cry. He sees himself divided between two worlds, the real one where he has to pretend to be normal, and the internal one where the voices of the upside down still echo. And here psychology finds the perfect metaphor. The upside down is his unconscious, a dark place full of memories that insist on returning. Everyone has an internal upside down, a place where we store what we cannot face, and Will lives on that edge all the time. But the curious thing is that even with all that weight, he never stops trying. There is an almost silent strength in him, a desire to keep going, even when no one understands the size of the pain he carries. And this is what makes him so human, because deep down, everyone has a piece of Will Byers inside them. And at this point, a new type of conflict begins to emerge, one that has less to do with what he lived and more to do with who he really is. The emotional repression and the fear of expressing himself. Will Byers is the portrait of emotional repression. He feels everything, absolutely everything, but says very little. He is the kind of person who carries the world inside his chest, but when someone asks, "Are you okay?" he answers, "I am." And the most curious thing is that for him, this silence is a form of protection. Because the last time the world heard what he felt, the result was chaos. So he learned to hold it in, to smile softly while his heart cries out for help. You know that kind of sensitivity many people call weakness. Will lives that every day. He is sensitive in a world that values whoever speaks the loudest. Except for him, the problem is not being unable to express himself. It is the fear of what happens when he tries. He fears being misunderstood, rejected, even ridiculed. So little by little, he starts to fade, and his silence becomes an armor. Fragile, but still an armor. This dynamic is very common among people who went through traumatic situations. After a while, the mind associates vulnerability with danger. Crying, showing fear, saying what you feel, all of that becomes synonymous with exposing yourself. And Will learned in the worst way that the world can be cruel to those who are too open. So to survive, he closes the doors. But ironically, it is exactly this that prevents him from healing. There are moments in the series where this conflict is visible in the smallest details, in the way he looks when trying to approach his friends but hesitates, in the way he holds back tears even when his heart is breaking, and the viewer feels it because everyone has been there, holding back tears to not seem dramatic, swallowing words that deserved to be spoken. And that is when Will becomes more than a character. He becomes a mirror. The most beautiful and saddest part is that he still tries to connect. Even hurt, even insecure, he seeks belonging. Except the difficulty to express himself makes everything feel like a mountain. How do you explain something you do not even fully understand? How do you talk about feelings that do not have names yet? It is like trying to describe a color only you can see. And in the process, he feels increasingly isolated, as if language itself fails to translate what he lives inside. And more, the fear of disappointing others weighs just as much as the fear of rejection. Will feels that if he shows everything he feels, he will be seen as weak, strange, or even a burden. So he chooses silence. But silence, when prolonged, becomes loneliness. And loneliness is treacherous. It starts as a refuge, and before you realize it, becomes a prison without doors. And that is exactly where he gets lost. The most interesting thing is that the whole group symbolizes phases of growing up, and Will represents the fear of growing up. Growing up means changing, opening up, showing yourself to the world. But for him, that is terrifying. He still wants to go back to the time when everything was simple, when the D&D game was the highlight of the day. And this is not immaturity, it is self-protection. Who has never wanted to go back to a time when it was easier to be accepted for who you were without needing to explain anything? And maybe that is what makes Will so special. He is not a classic hero nor a survivor who overcomes everything. He is human with all the contradictions that implies. He wants to be seen, but fears being seen too much. He wants to speak, but fears the sound of his own voice. And this internal dilemma grows little by little until it merges with another conflict, even more delicate one he keeps deep inside, and that starts to define everything he is. But at the same time, there is something beautiful in this fragility, because it reveals a silent courage, the courage to exist even without knowing if he will be accepted. Will does not need to raise flags or make speeches, he simply is, and that alone is already revolutionary. In a world that demands so much performance, he reminds us of the importance of simply feeling, even when it hurts. And it is this sensitivity that, paradoxically, makes him so strong. Only the problem is that holding all of this inside comes at a high cost. His mind begins to fragment, and the repressed emotions become a weight that traps him between two worlds, the world of appearance and the world of truth. And it is at this point that another trauma emerges, even deeper, one that completely redefines his journey: the guilt and the weight of being the survivor Will Byers survived. And although that seems like a miracle for him, it often feels like a sentence. Ever since he returned from the Upside Down, he carries the gaze of someone who saw something no one should ever see. But along with that gaze comes an invisible weight, the weight of guilt. Guilt for having returned when others might not have returned, guilt for causing suffering to his mother, his friends, the town. It is a silent burden that haunts him even in the calmest moments. Guilt is a shadow that feeds on the what if. What if he had fought more? What if the disappearance had been his fault? The human mind is cruel in this sense. It turns the victim into the defendant within their own internal court, and Will, with his sensitivity, feels this in an amplified way. He begins to believe that he is the reason for the chaos, that his presence brings pain. It is as if the simple fact of existing were a constant reminder of the fear everyone lived through, and the saddest part is that no one talks about it. People say it is good that you are back, but they do not ask how it feels to be back. And this is a powerful detail because society does the same with those who survive real traumas. It applauds the survival but ignores the scars. Will represents this collective silence, this expectation that he simply move on, as if trauma were something you can turn off like a switch. Guilt also shows up in small gestures. He tries not to bother anyone, tries to be discreet, tries not to take up space. It is as if he apologizes for being alive. This self-limitation follows him in everything, in conversations, in friendships, even in moments of joy. It is the typical behavior of someone who got used to asking for permission to exist. And this kind of guilt is dangerous because it corrodes self-esteem until only the fear of being too much remains. But there is something even deeper in this. The survivor often feels responsible for keeping others safe. It is almost as if he tells himself, since I came back, I need to take care of everyone. And with that, Will ends up becoming the emotional guardian of the group. He is the one who feels first when something is wrong, who notices the distance, who tries to hold together what is falling apart, but no one notices how much it exhausts him. Being the heart is beautiful, but it is tiring, and the weight of being the heart is exactly never being able to break. Will feels that if he collapses, everything collapses with him, so he pretends to be stable even when he is in ruins. This is a common trait in people who have gone through extreme experiences. They develop an apparent strength, but that strength is pure survival instinct. And the more they try to hold the world up, the more they forget themselves. Will walks this fine line all the time. There is a beautiful symbolism in all this. The boy who was swallowed by darkness and survived becomes the one who understands the pain of others the most. But this empathy, which could be healing, also becomes a prison. Because he feels too much. Everything that happens around him goes through him as if it were personal. It is the price of having a heart too big in a world that does not know how to handle so much sensitivity. And in silence, he carries the weight of being the living reminder of a collective trauma. But what happens when this guilt starts to mix with a feeling of emptiness? When the "I survived" transforms into "Why am I still here?" It is at this point that Will's mind begins to collapse and his psychology gains new layers of pain, a cycle of memories, fears, and internal pressures that push him deeper and deeper inside himself. The existential emptiness and the fear of disappearing again. Will Byers is not just afraid of monsters. He is afraid of disappearing again. And this time, not to the upside down, but from people's memory. It is the kind of fear that does not scream, it only whispers. With each laugh from his friends without him, with each plan that does not include him, the thought grows that he is fading little by little. And this is a pain many people know well, the pain of continuing to exist while feeling invisible. This emptiness he feels is not just loneliness, it is an identity hole. He constantly asks himself, who am I now? Before, he was the funny kid of the group, the dreamer, everyone's friend. Now he is the survivor, and this label suffocates him because at some point he stopped being seen as a person and started being remembered as an event. As if his story had stopped at the moment of the disappearance and everything after that were only an epilogue. And this is the problem with trauma. It redefines the narrative. After going through something so intense, it is hard to reconnect with everyday life. Everything feels small, colorless, purposeless. Will tries to go back to playing D&D, drawing, laughing, but nothing feels enough. It is like trying to go back to a song after the record has been scratched. And inside this silence, a fear is born. And if the emptiness is all that is left, his mind begins to associate this emptiness with the disappearance. It is almost poetic and tragic, how the fear of vanishing becomes a metaphor for emotional erasure. He fears that people will forget who he is, that the world will move on without noticing his absence. And honestly, who has never felt that? Being in a place full of people and still feeling alone, Will is the embodiment of this feeling. The cruelest part is that he tries to fill the emptiness with what he has: friendship, art, hope, but nothing seems to last. And this leaves him even more confused, because he knows he is not bad all the time, just empty. This oscillation scares him because it shows that the problem is not in the world around him, but inside him. And that is the kind of fear that hurts the most, the one you cannot run from because it lives in the same place you do. And it is interesting how this fear of being forgotten is universal. Everyone wants to leave a mark, be remembered, be part of something. Will wants this more than anyone, but feels he is being erased by his own friends, by circumstances, by life. And what he does not realize is that, deep down, emptiness is not absence, it is space. Space to rediscover who he is, to rebuild what was destroyed. But for that, he would need to allow himself to exist without fear. But fear does not let go easily. It is persistent, almost affectionate in the way it wraps around him. And Will lives in this duality, wanting to break free and at the same time feeling safe inside his own fear. Because fear is familiar, and the familiar, no matter how painful, gives a false sense of control. That is why he always returns to the same point. The fear of disappearing is, paradoxically, what keeps him existing. And it is exactly at this point, this emotional limbo between being and not being, that something new begins to grow inside him. A small spark, an almost imperceptible desire to understand his emptiness instead of running from it. But this search for meaning will lead him to a new type of confrontation, not with monsters, but with his own reflection. Will Byers is perhaps the character who shows the most how powerful and dangerous the mind can be, because at a certain point, what he feels begins to shape what he sees. The Upside Down stops being only a physical place and becomes a living metaphor of what exists inside him. Each shadow, each noise, each monster seems to gain strength as his fear grows. It is as if the pain had found a way to exist outside him, and this is something very real. Sometimes our inner world manifests in the external world, in illnesses, in behaviors, in relationships. The body speaks what the mouth cannot. And with Will, this connection is literal. His emotions and traumas project themselves into an alternate universe. It is his unconscious taking form, screaming what he tries to silence. And the most disturbing thing is that the more he tries to run, the more the inverted world approaches. There is a symbolic scene in all this. Will senses the mind flayer approaching, as if an invisible presence were watching him. But is it just a creature, or is it his own fear materialized? It is as if the universe were saying, if you do not look inside, what is inside will find you. And who has never lived something like this? That anxiety that grows when we avoid a problem, that weight that becomes real when ignored for too long. The most interesting thing is that the upside down is not only darkness, it is also a mirror, distorted but still a reflection. It shows what Will feels about himself, the sensation of being lost, forgotten, frozen in time. It is pain turned into landscape, and that is the most poetic point of his story. The external world reacts to the character's soul. The more he gets lost inside, the more the world around him corrupts. This brings a powerful reflection. How many times does our real life not do the same? When we are hurting, the world seems grayer. When we are afraid, everything seems threatening. And when we feel love, even the ordinary gains color. Will lives exactly that, but in an amplified way. He is the symbol of what happens when the emotional surpasses the psychological and begins to interfere with reality itself. And as frightening as this is, there is something deeply human in this journey, because the monster he fears is, deep down, the representation of what he does not accept about himself. And this is one of the hardest lessons to swallow. Sometimes what scares us the most is what resembles us the most. Will is forced to face this too early, and it is precisely this pain that pushes him, little by little, toward emotional maturity. From the outside, it looks like he is being hunted by supernatural forces. But psychologically speaking, what is happening is a process of integration, the unconscious trying to dialogue with the conscious. It is painful, yes, but necessary. Because only when the internal world is confronted does it begin to reorganize. And in some way, chaos is the first step toward healing. But the path to that healing is long. And before Will can understand this mirror that haunts him, he needs to deal with one last layer, the hardest of all, accepting that he is no longer the same boy who was taken, nor the same one who returned. And this will lead him straight into the final conflict of his emotional journey. The reconstruction when trauma becomes identity. Will Byers reaches the point where denying is no longer possible. Trauma is part of him, but not in a way that destroys him, in a way that defines him. Each fear, each absence, each emotional scar becomes a tool of self-knowledge. He realizes he does not need to erase what happened because what happened shaped who he is. And this is a subtle but powerful shift, turning pain into identity. This reconstruction is slow, almost imperceptible. It does not happen from one day to the next, nor through grand gestures. It appears in small details, a genuine smile, an honest conversation, the courage to look into someone's eyes and say, "I feel this." Will begins to understand that he no longer needs to hide behind silence or fear, and this acceptance brings a kind of freedom he never knew before. But freedom does not mean absence of pain, it means coexistence with it. Will learns to walk with the ghosts without being swallowed by them. Each memory of the upside down still exists, but he sees it as part of the landscape, not something that determines his destiny. It is what many call silent resilience. It is not about being strong, it is about allowing yourself to exist with everything you carry. The reconstruction process also affects his relationships. He grows closer to Mike, his friends, his mother, but in a different way, more truthful, more present, more emotionally connected. He understands that connection does not need to be perfect, only genuine. And by opening up to others, Will discovers that being accepted does not depend on erasing parts of himself, but on showing who he really is, even with flaws. And this changes the way he sees himself in the world. Will stops being only the survivor of the trauma and becomes someone who understands his own worth. He starts to realize that pain is not a sign of weakness, but part of a growth process. And it is fascinating how the narrative makes this learning almost palpable. We feel the weight becoming strength, the fear becoming awareness, the silence becoming voice. The most poetic thing is that this reconstruction is not linear. There are setbacks, bad days, moments when the past seems to pull him back. But now he understands that this is natural. It is like walking on a rough road. Each stone, each bump is part of the path. And instead of fighting against it, he learns to observe, accept, and move forward, using trauma as a compass, not an anchor. And in the end, what Will Byers teaches us is profound. Trauma does not have to be only pain. It can be identity, learning, silent strength. He shows that it is possible to survive without becoming someone different from who you are, and that sensitivity can be as powerful as courage. It is an intimate, silent process, but one that transforms the character into a symbol of emotional resistance. And this leaves a question in the air. Because if Will managed to transform his trauma into part of who he is, we ask ourselves, and us, what are we carrying that we have not allowed ourselves to integrate yet? And what would it be like if we transformed our own pains into identity, learning, silent strength? This is the point that connects his story with our lives, leaving room for the next step of emotional reflection. And what did you think of Will Byers' emotional journey? Were you able to identify with any moment of his story? Tell us in the comments which character you want us to analyze in the next video, and if you want to keep learning about how traumas, emotions, and experiences shape who we are, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. That way you will not miss any analysis and you will be able to see the world more deeply along with us.